Good evening. Welcome to the Global Briefing Series for this evening. My name is Randy Kluver. I'm the Dean of the School of Global Studies and Partnerships. We're delighted that you're here tonight. First, let me just say 新年快乐. Happy Lunar New Year for those of you who are paying attention. Tonight is Lunar New Year, and I hope that you enjoy it and I appreciate the fact that you're spending Lunar New Year with us. I have just a few announcements I would like to make. Number one, let me talk about what the Global Briefing Series is. This is a series of lectures that we bring esteemed and prominent members of the global community to the campus of Oklahoma State University, who give briefings on the most pressing global issues facing the world today. And so we're delighted tonight to have our speaker here. I'll introduce him in just a minute, but for those of you who have been a part of the GBS before, the Global Briefings, we'll welcome you back. And for those, this is your first time, you're more than welcome to come again. I've been asked to make just a couple of announcements. First, this Saturday, two events here in the Wes Watkins Center. Saturday from 11 to 2 is the International Bazaar. And in the exhibition hall across the way over there, there'll be food from around the world, and you're most welcome to participate in that. In addition, China Night is Saturday evening, and so it's an evening of performances celebrating Chinese New Year and Chinese culture, so you'd be welcome back for that. Finally, just a couple of business items. If you are here for extra credit for a class, we do have sign-in sheets available. They will be up here at the end of the session, so please don't miss that. Let me just take a brief poll. We'd like to figure out who's here, so please just raise your hands if you're from that program. If you are from the School of Global Studies and Partnerships, raise your hand. Okay, very good. If you're from the Department of Geography, please raise your hand. Okay, good. Department of Political Science, raise your hand. Very good. Community members, raise your hand. Very good. Okay, who am I missing? Who? Business, School of Business, Spear School of Business. Please raise your hand. Very good. Great event today for Chinese New Year as well. Before I forget, let me make one announcement. Our next Global Briefing Series speaker will be March 7th, when we'll have Sean Powers speaking on, you've got a brochure in front of you on it. Sean Powers is Senior Advisor for Global Strategy and Innovation at the U.S. Agency for Global Media, where he focuses on strategic planning, innovation, research and evaluation, and policy coordination. So you're welcome back at that event as well. Let me not delay any longer and introduce our speaker. It is a tremendous privilege for us to have tonight the Right Honorable Henry McLeish, who is actually an old friend of our program. Henry was here at the very beginning of the School of International Studies 20 years ago, and this is our 20th anniversary year, and so we're delighted that he's come back to join us this evening. Give you just a little bit of a background on him. He began his political career in Scotland in the early 1970s. In 1997, he was elected to Parliament and became a member of the Blair government. As Minister for Devolution and Home Affairs at the Scottish Office, he was instrumental in shaping Scotland's first Parliament in almost 300 years. He also has a background in higher education. As a member of the Scottish Parliament, he was Minister for Enterprise and Lifelong Learning, overseeing higher education, industry, science, technology, and the economy. He became First Minister of Scotland in 2000, taking responsibility for Scotland's role in the European and world stage, leading government missions internationally and implementing the nation's social and economic policies. He became a member of the Privy Council, an honor bestowed by Her Majesty the Queen in the same year. He played a key role in the process of devolution, which returned key aspects of legislative power and government authority from the UK to Scotland. After 30 years in elected office, Mr. McLeish retired from elected public office in 2003. During the last several years, he's been visiting professor and lecturer at a number of prominent universities, including the University of Arkansas, Edinburgh University, St. Mary's, the University of Oklahoma, and the United States Air Force Academy. Henry has published a number of books, including Citizens United, Taking Back Control in Turbulent Times, Scotland, The Growing Divide, Rethinking Our Politics, and the one that's really close to his heart, Scottish Football, reviving the beautiful game. So I think he's speaking about politics tonight, but it might devolve into soccer. So please welcome the Right Honorable Henry McLeish.
I'm happy to speak about football. I don't know how many young women play football. Show of hands? Just play soccer? Okay, I won't talk about football tonight because it'd be really, really boring. As the Dean said, I'm delighted to be back. I was here 20 years ago. I think I've had 2 other visits. I had lunch with to Wes many years ago. But the great thing about the university is there's lots of energy, there's lots of vitality, there's a lot of investment taking place. So I just want to thank the university for my kind invitation. And clearly, the university is going from strength to strength. And you know, it was Albert Einstein that said that knowledge is finite, but imagination circles the world. And it's great to come to an institution where not only do you learn about things that could help you in the future, but it also allows you to think, reflect. And when I think about the world at the present time, we need a lot of reflection, because there's no doubt this is a pretty turbulent period. The other point about Oklahoma is, which is, what I'm going to say to you is not believable, right? But it's true. I have now been to America 101 times since 1984. And I've been to Oklahoma 55 times. Now, am I crazy? I've been to Oklahoma more times than most Americans have certainly been there. But what I'd like to just do is add to the vitality that's on the campus. I love the people, the food, I could take or leave it, okay? I don't want to give you such a glowing report. People are fabulous. A lot of political friends I have been absolutely excellent. And I'm described in Tulsa, which is my basic second home, is the person with most knowledge about Oklahoma in the world who's currently not living in Oklahoma. So please take that as a compliment. But tonight, I want to try and deal with Brexit. There are 2 ways you could look at Brexit. One, you can conceive of it as an act of national self-harm from which it may take 10, 20, 30 years to recover. On the other hand, there are those in the UK who see it as an issue of identity, an issue where we can reshape our identity, move forward in the world, build new relationships, and replace the undoubted prosperity that we've had since 1973 as members of the EU with new prosperity. Now, in this debate, ladies and gentlemen, there are no neutrals. And this is one of the real problems about Brexit. I'm a great critic of political tribalism, political extremism, binary votes on big complex issues. But in the UK just now, part of the mess that we're in, and I use mess in its intended sense, is because there's no neutral ground. If you're a Remainer in terms of the vote, or a Brexiteer in terms of leaving, there is currently no common ground. And what I'd like to try and do, which is quite complex, is I first of all want to just bring you up to date on where we are on this complex issue. Secondly, draw up a kind of mosaic or a tapestry or even a jigsaw of all the bits and pieces that make up, and try and explain why the United Kingdom voted to leave one of the most successful post-war institutions, which is the European Union. Now, if you bear with me, we'll try and go through that as quickly as we can, and then I'd be delighted to take some questions. But in all of this, I'd like you to accept that we don't look at Brexit in isolation. I look at modern America post-Trump and see a lot of similar situations. I look at Western Europe, and I look at Italy, and I look at Austria, and I look at Poland, I look at Hungary, I look at the alt-right in Germany, where in Western democracies there is turbulence. Progressiveness is being contested. So one of the clear things is to see Brexit in a bigger context than merely looking at whether the British are being careful or sensible, or, as I said earlier, involving themselves in an act of self-harm. The second point is one for further reflection out with tonight. I'm a great believer, after spending 30 years in elected politics, 14 years in city government, 14 years in the House of Commons in London, 4 years in the Scottish Parliament, and really nearly 16 years of public service, nearly 50 years in all. I've now got to the point where I'm quite dismayed by the politics I've lived through. Now, I think that's quite positive, because if you're out of the hurly-burly of elected politics, you can think more clearly. And what I'd like to try and do is for you to think tonight, as I'm going through the Brexit schedule, that this could be about, currently in the Western democracies, which I include the United States, an issue of politics, democracy, governance, and I would call constitutionalism. You have a constitution. Britain, or the UK, along with Kazakhstan, New Zealand, and Israel, does not have a constitution. And maybe the implication of that will come out as we move through. So these are just really background issues, but the main narrative tonight for me is to describe where we are, explain how I think we got there, and then to kind of reflect on where we might be going if we leave Brexit. Brexit comes to place in a few weeks' time. We're 52 days away from us leaving the European Union, based on the first part, which is Article 50. I won't bore you with that, but the Article 50 is the way you leave the European Union. And nobody had thought of a way of leaving the European Union until the Treaty of the Union some years ago. So we now have an opportunity to leave, and of course the first country to opt to leave has been the United Kingdom. So that was the Article 50. From that, you've heard much discussion about the withdrawal agreement. The withdrawal agreement is a bit like a divorce. You separate, but you've got to look at the money. You've got to look at who looks after the cats and the dogs and other things like that. So essentially, this was about the looking at citizens of the UK living in Europe and citizens of Europe living in the UK. What about their future? 3.5 million going the two ways. Big part of the population. If we just crash out of the European Union, what happens to them? Good citizens from abroad who have now committed to spending their lives in Britain. We have a major problem in Northern Ireland and Ireland. You maybe heard of something called the backstop. It's too boring and tedious to talk about, but it's a major issue between two parts of the island of Ireland. We'll come back to that later. And the other issue is the divorce money. We negotiated a deal with the Europeans that we'd leave and we'd pay them £39 billion as our part of their forward programme that would leave a hole in their finances. But after that, if we leave on the 29th of March, we move into what they call a political declaration. And this is about the future. We've settled the divorce. We're leaving. Where do we stand in relation to Europe and the wider world? So that political declaration has got to be dealt with within 2 years. So it's a kind of staged process. Now, what I think we need to remember is that the government have been negotiating this for nearly 2 years. And when it was put to the House of Commons recently as a vote, the parliamentarians rejected it. So after 2.5 years, we seem to be left with a number of options. Crash out of the EU on March the 29th without an agreement. Renegotiate the agreement we've got, and the European Union has told us there is no way they're going to negotiate. The negotiations are over. This is a British problem, not a European problem. The third option is that the government might go for a general election, which will mean that Brexit will be the key issue to be decided. And then fourthly, there's the prospect of another referendum. Now, I'm a firm Remainer. I think this is an act of self-harm. I would automatically be drawn to another vote by the public. But where does this end? And in Canada, they came up with this term because of Quebec and their seeking independence. Instead of a referendum, they talk about a never-endum. So let's have an alternative vote. So it's 1-1. Leavers 1, Remainers 1. Hey, let's go for the best out of 3. Let's have another one. I'm being slightly frivolous here, but we could have 3 or 4 or 5. So I can't see another vote ending the process. Because as a Remainer, and as an extremist, and as a Remainer, I will want to carry on the fight to stay in there and go back in there. If the Brexiteers lose, they will have exactly the same position. So in that sense, we have reached, in my nearly 50 years of political and public engagement, a situation where I've no idea where we'll end up. Now, for a country like the United Kingdom, with even if you're a cynic, would accept we have a very distinguished history. So much so that we decided to give you your country back. And hey, what a reasonable job you've done with. So how is this great Britain, the great being the word, I mean, we used it before the president used it here. Why are we here? And that's the real part of the narrative. We know the current position, and people are perplexed to think there has to be a way forward. So what I'd like to try and do, in a quick way and with a bit of humour, take you through what I think is this jigsaw puzzle. But I have to tell you, let's pretend it's a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. And once we put all the places on the board and it all fits together, there is no guarantee that you might be any further forward than you were when the pieces were still in the bag. It's that complicated, it's that complex. So with that challenge in mind, let's move forward and ask ourselves some of the questions. The first one is, why the UK? Why after 46 years of membership since 1973, why not Germany? Why not Spain? Why not Poland? Why not Hungary? And that's a good question, because it seems that we, of all the countries, in this first point, are unable to cope with ostensibly being a good team player. I regard Germany as one of the most powerful countries in the world, a leader who I accept as the leader of the free world, and I'd be controversial and say not your president, not the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, but the Chancellor of Germany, who actually have learned lessons from their history and now are big team players in partnership, in coalition, developing a consensus within the European Union. And so that's one of the questions, is why the UK should be so discontented that we have to leave the EU. The other point about the United Kingdom is, and this is a factual point, not necessarily a political point, because you'll find that I'm slightly biased, but I try and be objectively biased, which is a different quality. This is an issue for the Conservative Party in Britain. Since 1945, since Winston Churchill said he would like to see, in the aftermath of war and destruction, he would like to see a United States of Europe. He was the first leader to suggest that. And what a heroic ambition that was at the time. But from that point, the United Kingdom has been very ambivalent. Okay, we'll be members, but we're not going to be enthusiastic members. And to be fair, that has come over to the Labour Party, which is my party. So there's an ambivalence from early days, despite the fact that we wanted the EU to replace a broken Europe with the help of NATO, through the Americans, with the help of the Marshall Plan. And that seriously worked. So in that sense, we have the Conservative Party over the last 40 years literally having a civil war within their own party. It's moved from being slightly ambivalent to being clearly sceptical, and now for a majority of the party, extremely hostile to the idea of the European Union. So that's fueling much of the discussion, much of the dialogue, much of the drive to get us out of the EU. Now, a political party has to do what they think is right, philosophically and principles and whatever. But David Cameron, who was the predecessor to Theresa May as Prime Minister, he decided that he had had enough of a group within his own party causing mayhem and mischief. And he took the decision to say, okay, this is an internal problem for me, but I'll ask the public of Britain to solve it. And he put it to a referendum. Now, what he didn't realise was that he was going to lose that. He didn't think he was going to lose. He thought this would be a walkover in the sense that good, solid British people wouldn't do anything that would risk the future of the country. He was spectacularly wrong, and as a consequence, we've had this situation now that within the Conservative Party, they have now a very hostile attitude towards the EU, and that really has become a major problem. And let me say in defence, my own party, the Labour Party, and you can't compare Republicans and Conservatives and Labour and Democrats, but essentially my party has not been particularly successful either. Because we have a leadership that is not very supportive of the EU. So a lot of the public have been confused as to the position of the Labour Party as we move forward. But then we have the next point I want to stress then, we've looked at why the Conservative Party issue. What about the EU itself? Because in the debate it took place in the referendum, the only thing it was talked about was immigration. Immigration. Sound familiar? But what they missed was the fact that after 45, we've now created an institution with 507 million people. An institution that ranks along with China and the US as the biggest trading countries in the world. 20% of all the world's exports and imports are based in the European Union. 44% trade of the UK is with the European Union. So what they did was they started off with 6 countries, especially the French and Germans. Germans had been on the march in 1870, 1914, 1939, and the joke, of course, is that when the Germans start to march, they always end up in the Champs-Élysées. And for those that are geography is not so good, that ain't anywhere near Berlin. And so therefore people were saying, in our name, it mustn't be done again. So the EU was established, and as I said, along with NATO, the Marshall Plan, we have never had a conflict, a war situation within the growing boundaries of the EU from the 6 countries in 1958 to the 28 countries. Now cynics say it would have happened anyway. I don't think they're right, because the 2 protagonists, France and Germany, came together, and the merits of that are seen in the 2 countries at the present time. So in that sense, what was missing from the debate, nobody talked about the fact that about peace, prosperity, security, stability. And in the world we live in, these are really valued things. I mean, who on earth would want to, take the boat and start to sail in a world where you have Duterte in the Philippines, Netanyahu in Israel, Xi in China, Putin in Russia? I was going to say President in America, but I'll resist the temptation to say that. But these are difficult times, troubled times. And again, the EU provided massive security, massive stability, and of course, an enormous trading opportunity. So what was the case of the Brexiteers then? Well, the main one was sovereignty. This is much talked about, but difficult to define. For some, it's the ability to be in charge. We won the war in Britain, so why are the Germans telling us what to do? Now that's highly simplistic, it's highly emotive, but when identity politics are to the fore, it's that kind of issue that can become important. Germany has no problem in sharing its sovereignty and pooling its sovereignty with the European Union, other countries, but Britain has. And we'll come on to a minute why that might be. It was also about money. Why should we give 12 billion every year to the European Union? Why should we support the European Union? You know, the biggest losers if we leave the European Union will be the universities. Because most of the money that goes into the EU comes back to the UK in the form of grants, support, research, design, and whatever. So it's quite bogus to argue that money goes out but doesn't come back. Then, of course, we've got the situation about laws. Only 17% of all the laws in Britain are made in Europe. But you wouldn't get that from the campaign, because again, the mantra was, why shouldn't English laws be voted upon by English people? Now, did you see the switch from British to English? Because many people believe that the thrust of this is mainly from England, not from the rest of the UK. Scotland voted to remain. Northern Ireland voted to remain. London voted to remain. So we have a situation where a lot of commentators think that the English part of this dimension was the really important one in actually taking us out. We then get to protecting borders. Let me be controversial again. The basic problem in the United States and the UK about immigration is neither country has a policy. And without a policy, you're going to get into lots of trouble, whether it's asylum seekers, refugees, economic migrants. So immigration became the key topic in the United Kingdom. And it was all about the fact that the EU has what they call the single market. It allows the free movement of goods, services, people, and investment, finance. So if you live in the EU, you can come to the UK. If you live in the UK, you can come to the EU. But that was then put in horrific terms, long lines of black and coloured faces, few of which are in the EU, on posters. It was the idea that they're coming to steal your jobs, coming to steal your homes, they're coming to do this and coming out. Frankly, I was embarrassed to be an ex-politician when I looked at some of this stuff. But, as you can see in your own country, immigration is highly emotive and often taken out of context. And if you ask Americans, as opinion polls do, for example, it's way down on the list of US priorities, as was the case in the United Kingdom during the debate. And so therefore, that was the reasons that really fueled people to say, well, sovereignty, foreigners, immigrants, let's just leave. And the tragedy is it worked, because 52% voted to leave, 48% voted to remain. And so therefore, it seems to me that these were not strong reasons. But on the other hand, when I ask a Brexiteer, what are the benefits? No, so you're sitting here, you're a Brexiteer, and I've come up and said to them, what are the benefits of leaving? First answer is, what do you mean? That's always a good first response. I mean, I'm being asked to leave the security, stability, prosperity of the EU to join this band of happy followers. What's the benefit? And you know what? I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting. Because essentially, for a lot of Brexiteers, the actual leaving of the EU is the benefit. Now that then cloaks a number of issues we've already talked about, but it raises some further issues about where we are. And the next point is the one where I think we get to the nub of why we're leaving the EU. I joked earlier about the exceptionalism of the UK. And there was a time where we did rule the waves. You know this Rule Britannia, you know our national anthem? Rule Britannia, Britain rules the waves. Da, 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 da. Well, it was true at a point in time, but there's a lot of people think that we've missed out post-war in this kind of nostalgia, this kind of sentiment, this emotion, this looking over our shoulders to either a real or imagined period in our history is shaping. And one of the reasons, the second reason is, we had the colonies. We had an empire. And of course, a lot of people think the sun has never set on the empire. We now have a Commonwealth. And there's this great concept of the Anglosphere. We want New Zealand and Australia and America and Britain, English-speaking countries, to come together to form this new idea. And then there's the Atlantic relationship between the US and the UK. And all of a sudden, I was getting the notion through that point that was Britain going through an identity crisis? And interestingly, you can go back to 1962, the Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, really annoyed British Prime Minister Macmillan because he said then, which is really important, Britain had lost an empire but had not yet found a role. I believe that he was right then and he's right now, because identity, confidence, search for a role, I think that's very much part of where where we are. So in that sense, a lot of people were not voting their economic interests, not voting for a wide variety of reasons, but there was a lot of sentiment. And that, in a sense, leads me on to why would people not vote their economic interests? I've always been puzzled by Americans who can vote for anything, but often not vote for their economic interests. You know, it's a sensible thing. This is happening in the UK now. So the poorest people, older people, out of work, Rust Belt areas, depressed areas, lost manufacturing jobs, feel they're neglected. That was largely, in England, the Brexit vote. It's largely the Trump vote in America. So what is it? Post-2008, the crash, a lot of people have just felt left out. A lot of people are building up a lot of grudges, resentment, anxiety, anger about what's going on. So this was another ingredient into all of this, where the nature of the population in certain parts of England, who just felt elites had bypassed them. They were going to make a protest, going to make a point. And of course, if you take populism in its raw sense, we had enough populism in Europe before the Second World War. We don't naturally relate to an idea, and to be really provocative, ended up with 6 million Jews, homosexuals, people with disabilities, and others that didn't fit into that neat them and us category being virtually destroyed. So populism has been able to sweep up, as part of the EU debate, the idea that if you have a grudge or a grievance, this is a referendum. May not really be about the EU, but you can vote on whatever you wish. But the EU was used partly as a scapegoat in dealing with that. And so therefore, I think the globalization issue, the 2008, all of that was very, very instructive in saying to people, we don't like what's going on, and we can use this once in a generation opportunity to register a referendum vote. And now the other point about that was that we progressives, and I'll say that all of you are progressive and elites or about to be elites, we tend to forget that out there on every breakfast table, a lot of people are not discussing human rights or the state of human rights in North Korea and arguing about the price of the pound or the price of the dollar. There's a lot of people out there who just genuinely feel that progressives have been so confident about the onward march of democracy, the onward march of progress, they've actually forgotten to look over their shoulder and find that a lot of people have just deserted these heady ideals, which I still think we should push forward on. And so therefore, the referendum gave them a once-in-an opportunity to tell the establishment, to tell the expert, to tell the elites, we're not listening. And we want to follow this particular route. And on that basis, a lot of people, for ideological reasons, were able to say, look, vote for leave and there'll be another future. And interestingly, the bulk of the other future for a lot of the Conservatives in the UK is to be like America. Now, I don't want to insult anybody, but, and God bless you, I don't want to be like America. I love America as a country. I love the people. But I hate the massive inequality like Britain. I hate the fact that the market dominates. Not like Britain, but could be. And obviously, we're very upset just now about the idea of chlorinated chicken coming to the UK for our dinners and our lunches. That's been a big factor about America, but being frivolous. But the point is, ideologically, a lot of people are using this to say, we're a welfare country, a welfare state country, but they like the idea of low taxes, low welfare, and of course, fewer regulations on employment. And sadly, this is how America's portrayed in Europe. And so therefore, there's a view of us which we don't want to be like America. Would Scotland like to be like Norway or Denmark? Yes, I would. Could the UK ever be like Denmark and Sweden or Norway? Never could, because it's too big. So this ideological idea, a lot of people just want to be like an offshore country that has, as I said, low taxes, low welfare, low regulations, and will attract this foreign investment. To me, as a progressive, that would only deepen inequalities and deepen the unfairness in society. But therefore, it was part of the mix, the hidden mix that was put to the people. I mean, nobody's going to go out and say, look, vote Brexit and we're going to end up in America as the 51st state. That'd have been difficult. But the underlying ideas were very much, you know, we like the ideology of the states, so we won't talk about that, but that might be one of the hidden factors. The other issue for me was, we talked about constitution earlier. We don't have a written constitution. So a prime minister with a majority in the House of Commons has the ability to say, I'll have a referendum on this, that and the other. And it's like an elective dictatorship at the heart of government. They can do what they want. You have a constitution which allows you to have relationships looked out, public freedoms, all of that safeguarded. We don't. So my advice about referendums, we had a Scottish referendum in 2014. And okay, I wasn't moved by it. But I now believe that the referendum is deadly, divisive, and very, very dangerous. Because in a vote like that, what happens to the losers? In an election in America, every 2, 4, and 6 years, if your guy doesn't win, your government doesn't get in, your president doesn't get in, you have another chance. So the losers can come again. With the referendum, with the country split down the middle, it's all about the winners and not about the losers. And then people say to me it's democratic. Is it? Is it? If democracy is measured on the basis you have one vote more than the other party, how democratic is that? What does it say about your democracy? And what does it say about the information, the political literacy, the civic awareness? And a strong democracy surely requires strong citizens with strong knowledge and information about what they're involved in. But I'll leave that one with you. So all of these things were kind of gelling together. You know, you couldn't say, oh, we're leaving because of immigration or the ideology or this and that. But it really framed a very complex collection of issues from which you can't say that they're 10% on ideology or 10% on this, but you can say that they all fuse together and to make life more problematic for David Cameron when he announced the referendum than he ever thought it might be. And I suppose the final point for me is this question of the troubled world we live in. How sensible is it for us to leave the EU, which is a competing regional bloc to the Chinese and to America? Hopefully America and the EU work closely together. That's not the situation just now. And it may not be in the future, but let's hope it might change. But the European Union, as I said earlier, provides that security. And if you live in a troubled world, I often say to American audiences, the Ukraine is closer to Europe than it is to America. Israel is 1,000 miles from my front door. And Russia is not far away from Finland. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are 3 tiny EU countries just next door to St. Petersburg. And I think at times, in terms of the dialogue, the US, because of its oceans, safe country above, maybe safe and complex countries below, there's no recognition that Europe is potentially at the center of some serious, serious trouble in the future. And what I think I'm saying is that the United Kingdom on its own would not be the same potent force for good or involvement in a war, if anything actually happened. You know, and people say, no, look, this is 2019, talk of aggression on that scale. It can't be. Really? You know, this turbulence might disappear. It might require a lot of effort. But the current situation just now is that the UK is looking into a black hole. You know black holes from astronomy? Nobody knows what happens in them, but the closer you get to them, it's really quite worrying. So this is the dilemma, that all of these factors have come together. We've now voted to leave, but in a sense, I think the real issue is what did we vote for and what actually might happen about that. So, from 1973 to now, the EU has been a good friend, a good ally. People think they could do better. They love their country. They want to be good patriots, and that has no scope or no room for other countries to come in. But look, even the United States is not fully sovereign. It shares part of its sovereignty with other international bodies. If your president remains long enough, that's going to be a thing of the past. But currently, you're still part of the world's nations. And so therefore, I've always been, and I'll finish on a philosophical point, that the world just now is breaking up. Authoritarianism, nationalism, isolationism, nativism, Islamophobia, the them and us. That can't make the world successful. And what we've got is a situation where the Brexit debate has to be seen in that overall global context. And for me, I was caught by the idea of a French writer, philosopher, of Les Miserables, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Victor Hugo. I'm no expert on his work, but prolific thinker. And he was really perturbed about the state of France in the 19th century and the adventures of Napoleon. And he said he loved his country, France. He was a great patriot. But he was so worried about nationalism, because nationalism needs a them and us, that he coined the phrase that he would like to be a patriot of humanity. You know, so that's a bit lofty in relation to the nuts and bolts of a Brexit debate. But it does inspire me to think that the world can't become compartmentalized. You know, MAGA can't be transferred to other countries. So if we were all in the MAGA game, the world would be a horrific mess. And currently, if you take Western Europe, former Eastern European countries, all of them are working together, 28 countries, for their own good, but global good. Nobody talks about the fact that 3 countries, of Spain, Portugal and Greece, were dictatorships. They came into the EU, they didn't tick any of the boxes. You cannot become a market economy and a democracy overnight, but they came in. When the Soviet Union collapsed, we had 8 countries coming in to the EU. So if that's not a force for political good, I'm not sure what is. So my main concern is I try to avoid being too depressed. There's a lot of fight left in me, but at the end of the day, when we talk about Brexit, we have to talk about the coming together of all of these factors to impact people in various different ways. But the net effect just now is, you know, the Hotel California, the Eagles record. You can sign out, but you might never leave. And sadly, this is where we're probably going to be ending up. So I don't bring you any great hope. I'm as confused as the next one, but I have spent some time trying to structure my brain to capture some of the big issues behind where we are. So thanks for listening very attentively. Hope we can have some discussion and questions after I finish. I'm finished. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for your comments that direct our attention to really understanding some of the deeper dimensions behind what is arguably the most important decision the British nation has made for the last 50 years, if not longer. So we do have some time for questions, for discussion. I will repeat your question into the microphone so we can capture it on video, and then, so please, go ahead.
Lady.
Yes, thank you. There are 3 things you've left me still wondering about. Gibraltar, Jeremy Corbyn's peculiarities, and the Scottish situation. In 2014, I gather you didn't like the idea of Scotland leaving the UK, but can't it be argued that Scotland now would be justified in wanting to remain within the European Union since the Brexit referendum?
Let me capture that if I can. Just so you've asked him to comment a little bit more about Gibraltar, about Jeremy Corbyn, and the future status of Scotland vis-a-vis the EU.
Yeah, they only gave me 45 minutes. You know, I could have. My head is filled with so much I could have spoken to you for the next 10 years. But you're absolutely right to identify 2. Gibraltar is not an issue I'm getting over concerned about. I mean, it's a kind of throwback from history. The Spanish are a bit upset, but it's not a major issue in the scheme of things unless you're a Gibraltarian. But they actually want to be part of the United Kingdom, so they seem happy. So if they're happy, why shouldn't I be happy amidst the rest of the chaos? Corbyn is an interesting question. I spent 14 years in the House of Commons with Jeremy Corbyn. And the problem for Jeremy is he's never been a lover of the European Union or the European ideal. And he mirror images part of the Conservative argument, that he would like a Britain free from the European Union so he could do things in terms of public ownership, in terms of politics, that the EU might not allow. Although France runs a coach and horse through the European Union rules, it pretty much well does what it wants. And my contention is that if in 2016 my party, Corbyn, had had a campaign worthy of its name, we would not be in the situation we are in today. Because a lot of Labour voters were very confused as to what we actually stood for. And hey presto, 2 years later, a lot of them remain still very confused as to what is happening. And I take no pride in what actually happened there. However, Scotland then is quite a dramatic issue. In 2014, I voted to stay in the UK. I was the only one in my family. I have a family of extreme militants in my family, including my Canadian wife. She voted to be independent. But when we voted in 2014, what it meant was you got the UK, but you also got the European Union thrown in. The narrative has now changed. And I think your assertion is right, that in another referendum, it won't be soon, but there will be another referendum, a lot of Scots will decide they've probably had enough, but it won't be about nationalism. It won't be about the SNP, the Scottish National Party, the predominant party. It will be about governance, be about democracy, about politics. Because although we have a Scottish Parliament and we have devolution, it's made its views known, it voted against leaving, but nobody was listening. So I think the fact that Westminster is not listening to other parts of the country may accelerate a different outcome. But what you should also, I think, be aware, to continue your point very quickly, Dean, is the position in Northern Ireland. I mean, Northern Ireland has been one of the great successes over the last 20 years. Building on the work of John Major, the Conservative Prime Minister, Tony Blair got the peace deal signed in 1997. And what has happened since then at Northern Ireland has developed, the Republic has developed, but the demographics are changing. And as part of the deal, there could be the possibility of a plebiscite or a referendum about the North and South joining up to become one country. That would clear up some of the problems that were created in the 1920s when Northern Ireland was split. And I was joking with the other classes, and forgive me because I see a lot of faces and you've heard this joke before. So you might have the prospect, as you look ahead, that on the map just now it's Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Ireland might take over Northern Ireland. Scotland may become independent. So on your books and on your geography books, there'll be something called Wengland. This will be Wales and England as a proper substitute for the great United Kingdom. I'm partly joking, but on the other hand, hopefully that answers some of your questions.
Good, thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Given that Theresa May herself used to not be pro-Brexit and the referendum was non-binding and only won a margin of like 4%, why is it such a priority for the Tories and the current government to go through with Brexit?
So if I can capture the question, given that it was a close vote, only 4 percentage points difference, why has it become such a priority for the Conservative Party to push this forward?
You're absolutely right. I mean, Theresa May is a Remainer. But within the Conservative Party, to directly answer your question, there are about 80 Conservative MPs out of 300. They don't have an overall majority in the House of Commons, so there's 300 of them. 80 of them. Not to offend people, let me pick my words very carefully. Some of them are delusional. Most of them are ideological. There's a few romantic and sentimental people amongst them. But they have a different vision of where the United wants to be. And currently, the Prime Minister is the prisoner of a group within her party that has the ability to bring her government down, the ability to destroy the Conservative Party in its current form. And she has decided, I think, to put party before country. Because Thatcher lost her head because of Europe. John Major lost his head. Cameron lost his head. And Theresa May will be the next victim. And when looking at that, she could have made a decision to say, I'll face down the Brexiteers in my party. And so sadly, for me, I didn't want to labour this too much, the ideological thing, the kind of delusion sentiment, the sun has never set on us, we deserve better, that part of it has dominated the campaign. But there's a lesson for progressives in all of this. Progressives, if you listen to a lot of people like the Conservatives, they are very enthusiastic about their desire to change and get out. We progressives are often far too polite, far too laid back. And if you listen to CNN, if you listen to MSNBC, or even if you're really desperate, listen to Sky News, Fox News, then what you find is progressives come on and it'll take us 3 weeks to answer a question which requires 2 lines. On the one hand, and on the other hand, if you take this factor, it's conditional upon this, etc., etc. So a Republican comes on, or a Conservative, bang, bang, done. So all these things are impacting on this debate. And I listened to a guy called Farage of the UKIP party, UK Independence Party. He's as smooth as hell. And for good ill, he always gets photographed beside a bar with a pint of English beer and a cigarette. Nobody smokes, but he does. And this is the romantic profile of the past. And people love it. So we come on, we've got the smart suits. And we've been to Eton, and we've been to this, and we've been to that. And the public are saying, hey, you might be fraudulent, Nigel, but we're going to vote. He's a stockbroker. And he comes over as Joe Soap's, grandfather. And, I'm joking, but at the end of the day, progressives got to realise that the world is not shaped in their form now, and there's a lot of work to be done to try and put forward a different narrative so that people at least have a more decent choice.
Good, thank you.
Yes. If the backstop is rejected in Ireland, do you think there would be more unsettlement like we saw in the past?
So, sorry, if the backstop is rejected in Ireland,
would we see more unsettlement like we did in the past?
are we likely to see more unrest, more discontent?
There's no guarantee that will happen, and let's hope it doesn't happen, because Northern Ireland has been one of the great successes of post-war politics in the United Kingdom. Warring situation, kneecapping situation, Protestants and Catholics fighting, Sinn Féin, Unionists, what a mess. It's now peaceful. The backstop is a curious thing in the sense that if we don't have a deal with the EU, then the EU requires a hard border, because Ireland is the most extreme part of their geography of the EU. But to cover that, we need a backstop, which is really an insurance policy. So until we have a deal with the EU, we're all part of the customs union until the 2 years period after we leave in a few weeks' time. It's not so much there'd be any violence, but what there is that they've got used. There is no border now in the island of Ireland, and if there was to be a border, then you'd have to pay tariffs, you'd have customs guards and whatever. And it's not so much the reality of that, but it's the idea that a lot of Northern Ireland people might think, we're unionists and we love the UK and we might want to defend that. A lot of other people in Northern Ireland might want to join. And quite frankly, after Brexit, we don't need another 2 parts, one part former the UK, another part existing UK, to be falling out and squabbling. And if you take the drift of my discussion tonight, all of this is just a massive distraction, because we have climate change problems, we have massive inequality. You're the richest country in the world, we're the 5th richest country in the world, and people go to food banks. Anybody here been to a food bank? Is that how we want to spend our lives? So the issues of inequality, injustices, climate change, transport, immigration, housing, all of that has been put on the back burner for the last 2 years and have not been attended to. And the danger is we don't want to add Northern Ireland to that particular set of problems.
Might I ask you to address the economic impacts? What do you think would happen? And of course, it's just speculation at this point, but what would happen to the UK economy? What would happen to the EU economy should Brexit happen in 52 days?
The EU, currently, the UK membership of the EU means that all trade for the 28 countries is dealt with by the European Union. All the deals, all the new countries, all the relationships with China, America were all dealt with at the heart of the EU in Brussels. And that was to make sure that with a single market and a customs union, there was conformity. Now that has served Britain well because 44% of all our trade is with the EU. But 44% of Germany's trade is not with the UK. So one of the problems is that we will have a disproportionate amount of reliance on the EU, and if we got out without any agreement, that would be completely disastrous because overnight we would be paying tariffs, whereas we're part of the customs union just now, and it's tariff-free. And what the EU does is that the 28 countries have an external tariff, so America and Canada and whatever will pay tariffs to sell in the EU, but the 28 countries have no tariffs and freely. That's the first point. The second point is Britain makes great play that we could have new friends. We can, build up the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth's share of trade is minuscule and is unlikely to get any better. I mean, there's a limit to the kind of things we can trade in. The third point then becomes that Britain says, well, we can negotiate new trade deals. The EU trade deal with Japan has taken years upon years. There's a trade deal with China. The one with America fell through. But sometimes it can take 10 years. And this is the reason for the backstop. If it's going to take 10 years to come to some trading agreements and customs union single market, and then if we didn't have the backstop, then there'd be real difficulty. So if you look at the complexion, and the other thing about the EU is we have trading agreements with something like 160 countries. So Britain's actually saying, of the trade deals that we've got, we don't need that because people will want to trade with us anyway, A, because we're British. That's good. And then we'll spend the next 20 years negotiating trade deals with other countries. And one is America. And the great problem about America is it would be importing, your agricultural industry is very, very strong and big. If we signed up with you without no agreements, or agreements that favoured you, that could destroy our agriculture industry in the UK. So all of these things add up again to a very complex picture. And quite frankly, the idea that Britain wants to spend the next 30 years negotiating with the US, negotiating with Canada, and again, in terms of the presentation of this, people said, not a problem, we'll have a deal with Canada on Monday, we'll have a deal with Japan on Tuesday, or on Wednesday we'll have a deal with North Korea. Well, that might take till Thursday knowing North Korea, but the issue is one then where it doesn't make sense. And I'm all for the fact that people say, well, it doesn't really matter. We don't care about trade and money and whatever. We're British and sovereignty is important. I don't buy that. Because if sovereignty means you're committing yourself to being a poorer country, then why would anybody in their right mind want to do it? Because sovereignty doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't buy your food. And at the end of the day, you've got to have some sharing, pooling of sovereignty. The United States just now is a bit complex because you're kind of looking in on yourself. MAGA means that somebody else is going to have to be second because you're going to be always first. And Britain adopts that attitude out with the EU, then I don't think it would be productive for us.
One more question? Yes.
Considering, sir, as you said that academics are a part of the economic elite, how can we bring others back to the progressive march of democracy other than not being allied?
Can I come back next week? Well, this is part of the thing that's filtered through my presentation. I just believe, and I count myself in that I've been a member of the Labour Party now for nearly 50 years. I have been in public office, as I've said, and I've always felt that the onward march of progressiveness, which in terms of democratic, human rights, all of that will just carry on. Well, this could be a temporary lull, or it could be something more significant, but I'm not willing to take the risk. So I think we have to rethink, progressives have to rethink, because in your country, MSNBC, CNN, some of the other, Washington Post, New York Times, they want to tell me every day that Donald Trump's done something that they don't agree with. But do I care? But what I do care about is what the implications of any of that could be for Europe, for the American people, for trade, for climate change, for coal industry, for pollution, etc., etc. So I think progressives have got to realise that there can't be a million times that they want to tell the American electorate that that your president might not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, right? But so what? And the more we attack, and let's to be fair, he won with a much smaller proportion of the vote. Okay, the popular vote was 3 million for the Democrats, but nobody should think he's out of the running. This is a mass manipulator of news and a brilliant manipulator. He has a base who don't care about what he's done in his private life or what he's done in terms of his hotel chains or even with Russia. And what we need to do is to say less concern about that, of course expose it, but at the end of the day, build up a new narrative that can take some people with us. And in America and in the UK, the progressives, which are Liberals and Democrats and Labour Party, we build coalitions of interest, as do the Republicans. But that coalition must include a lot of people in the Rust Belt who feel their futures are not good, who look backwards and feel they had better times in the past. And in that sense, our coalition should be reaching out to take people on board. But I also think, sorry, Randy, but the important point here is, does the two-party system serve America well? Can the two-party system contain all the different shades of grey or red or blue that currently is the case? We have a multi-party system in the UK, but the two parties dominate. In most of the European countries, let's take Germany again, they have coalition government. They have cooperation, they have consensus, they speak to each other. How novel that is in politics, huh? Imagine speaking to your opponent and getting an agreement. Wow, you should get Nobel Prizes for that. But that's what they do day in and day out. So why is the UK and the US of democracies uniquely indifferent to the idea of political reform? And just as a little tidbit, I did an article for one of the Scottish newspapers about all the Democrats coming into the elections. In 2016, you spent in America £6.5 billion on your elections. 2.65 billion was spent on the presidential elections. Because for a country that doesn't much like government or politicians at times, you spend a hell of a lot of time electing people and listening to them. In the UK, it's a much shorter period, but the general election in 2017, total expenditure for all the parties was $70 million. No TV advertising, no bad things being done by corrupt lobbyists and other things. 70 million as against $2.65 billion. And even if you take the exchange rate, which is in your favour just now, that's an awful lot of money. So why do you put up with it? That's your challenge for the future. But on the other hand, there's two parties. In the Democratic Party it's split, Republicans are split. So why don't you have, not a centrist party, headed by the maybe former head of Starbucks, but have parties that reflect ordinary people, ordinary interests. And in the UK, we need to do that as well. So what I'm arguing is that the old political party system is out of date. You send people to Congress, we send people to London, and that's the game starts. Tribalism in Westminster is as bad as the Congress. Polarisation of politics. You say A, I'll say B, and there'll be nothing in between. Now, if Americans want to support and tolerate that as we move forward, that's entirely up to your choice. But my suggestion is that the role of the citizen becomes more important. The multi-party system is developed. The idea of coalition governments, as they have in Europe, is a good one for us. And at that point, hey, there's a lot to be played for. But to use an age thing, most of you here, it's your challenge. I'd like to be around in 100 years, kind of looking in from up top and saying, wow, you did a good job. But if we don't, then the anti-progressiveness that's going on might just continue. And it's in Italy and it's in Austria, I've said all these places. And to be complacent and think, well, it's just the turn of the political tide, I don't think it's going to be.
I just realized we could have, with the money we spent on the election, we could have built a wall. a really big one.
Or half a wall. Half a wall, yeah.
Half a wall. So please join me in thanking the Right Honourable Henry McLeish for his presence tonight and for his friendship.
Thank you.